The Taming of Coyote, Chapter 8. The morning brought chaos and confusion. Everyone in turn had gathered into the square. Many villagers saw the missing coyote as an omen. To the most superstitious, the trip was now being second-guessed. Lord Grundle marched himself onto the scaffold and examined the crate and broken lock. He scrunched up his face tightly in a scowl. He picked up the lock and manipulated it in his hands. A horrible fiend is at work. The devil has released his black magic on Turn. Does this mean that Turn will not assist Care after all? Roland asked. Poppycock, my brother, Lord Grundle replied loudly. The woodland devils are just trying to scare us. But we have God on our side. Fear not, men. Keep your faith. A scream suddenly diverted their attention. Uncle Homer recognized that scream in an instant, and he rushed to the edge of the crowd as Aunt Esther ran into his arms. What is it, woman? What are you screaming about? What's wrong? Sonia's gone. She isn't in her room, and I can't find her anywhere else. What if she's in the woods, Homer? She gasped as she glanced at the empty crate and clean scaffold. Oh no! What if the devils took her? I don't think she was kidnapped by a coyote, Esther, Uncle Homer said calmly. But what if she went out there to play, Homer? Those devils are surely angry with this. They'll kill her for sure. Lord Grundle scratched his chin. He frees his servant, and then he steals away a child from her bedroom. He is playing dirty. He then began to mutter inaudibly to himself. He frowned a moment, then he raised his hands high over his head. People of Turn, fear not. We must hurry to get our brave men to the safety of Care. Those of us left behind will search for our beloved Miss Sonia. You must hurry. Within the wagon, Sonia was curled in the corner behind some bushels. The procession had been in motion for some time. The commotion in Turn and the unsteady ride hadn't seemed to stir her in any way. Hour after hour she slept there, hidden from the menfolk. A wheel ran over a large rock, sending the wagon into a rickety bounce. Once it hit the ground, it gave Sonia a good jostle, which pulled her from her sleep rather abruptly. She looked around in panic and gasped. The wagon was moving. She had fallen asleep, and now the wagon was moving. How long had she been asleep? How far from Turn were they? Carefully, she peeked outside. She didn't recognize this piece of road, these trees. Nothing. This was much farther into the woods than she had ever been. What was worse was that she was hungry. She debated whether to help herself to the food in the bushels or to simply stick it out. But what would she do then? She'd be starved and likely found out if her stomach growled too loudly. She'd never be able to stay hidden for 3 solid days. But what would happen if she were discovered? Should she try to return to Turn? Venture to Care? Her mind swam in confusion. Uh-oh. And now, she had to go to the bathroom. Hopping out of the wagon now was absolutely out of the question. Telling them to stop was a terrible idea, too. There was no way she'd be able to explain herself. There was no choice left to her other than to just sit tight, hold it, and wait. She just hoped that her body could withstand that weight. Hold up there, one of the men called. We should give the horses a rest. I could also go for a bite. We should set up some sort of camp, Uncle Homer added. By the time we finish up and get ready, the sun will be going down. The night beasts will be about and on the hunt. It'll be safer to prepare here and now. As the wagons came to a stop, the horses put up a small fuss. They were a focused breed. They were tired, sure, but always used to working to completion before stopping. Their determination was honorable, but not even their perseverance would get the men through the woods after dark and to Care in one day. Aside from that, despite their size and strength, these woods brought a heavy unease over them. In one of the wagons, Sonia was curled in the fetal position in the corner. Her lips were puckered in discomfort. If she didn't have to go before, she definitely had to go now. And bad. She peeked out to see the menfolk tying up the horses and preparing the campsite. They all seemed to be congregating on the left side of the road. Perfect. As silently as she could, Sonia crawled out of the wagon, fully focused on not wetting herself, and she dropped to the ground. It brought a wave of discomfort as her insides swished about and cramped her middle. It only took a few seconds to find mobility again. In the next instant, she darted into the woods on the right side of the road. As much as Sonia would have loved to relieve herself, she knew that there was still a chance that she could be noticed. For 15 minutes, she fought through trees and bushes until she found a quiet and secluded place. Then, she performed necessary needs, finalized with a long, comfortable sigh. All her muscles relaxed, finally free of the tension of holding in what wanted to come out. After taking a few minutes to relish in her comfort, Sonia readjusted herself and got to her feet. It would be best to hurry back to the wagon. However, then she realized something. She hadn't exactly been paying attention to what way she was heading. She didn't take a straight path in her search for the perfect bush to pee behind. So she had no idea what way the road was. She flung her hands up to her face as she felt her heart leap into her throat. She was lost. She had no compass and no map. Everything here was looking dim and repetitive. Sonia was aware that there was more than one road between Turn and Care, and all led to different unknown places. If she even found the road, there was no way to tell which one would get her to one village or the other. Perhaps if she just turned around and walked in a straight line, she'd get lucky and find the road. If she found the wagons and the campsite, she'd be able to hide until the following evening and be far more careful about not getting lost. 15 minutes turned into an hour, then another. The world was getting darker, and Sonia's only company was the sound of leaves under her feet. She felt like she was going in circles, yet she recognized nothing. It took everything in her to not cry and keep her head. She peered up, but it was no use. The dense leaves overhead blocked the stars in the sky. There would be no navigation that way either. Also, the darker it got, the cooler it got. The village was clear, but in these woods, shade was abundant. She rubbed her arms with her hands. Thank goodness she brought a little extra cover. A rustle came from the darkness. Sonia spun around with a startled yell. "What's that? Who's there?" No answer came to her. It was obvious, however, that something was close by. "Hello?" Still no reply came. Sonia felt her skin becoming cold and clammy. She trembled from a mixture of fear and chill. Whatever was making that noise was coming closer. The closer it came, the more she could hear its beastly breathing and panting. Whatever it wasn't human. In the next moment, a dark body leapt from between the bushes. It seemed to fly with grace and thumped to the ground before her. Sonia let out a scream as she cowered to the ground and shielded herself with her arms. She could hear the beast panting, but it sounded as if it was coming no closer. Slowly, she peered through her fingers. Before her stood a coyote. That was bad, wasn't it? Countless people from Turn had met serious injury or even death when coming face to face with the coyotes of these woods. Even as mere animals, they had earned the title of woodland devils. A groan, somewhere between a howl and a yawn, came from the coyote's throat. In this light, he was still visible. He didn't seem too aggressive. In fact, his tail wagged wildly and happily. His mouth was open in what seemed like a big smile. His pink tongue bounced as it dangled from his mouth with every breath. Sonia stared at him a moment before she realized that she recognized him. It was the young coyote from the previous night. Phew! As if he had realized that she had recognized him, he dropped his front half and let out a bark. He spun in crazy circles in the leaves before facing her, dropping back into the play stance and barking again. He seemed awfully excited to see her, Perhaps coyotes were more intelligent than imagined. Perhaps they practiced gratitude. She had saved his life, after all. "You're still alive," Sonia stated. "I'm glad to see they didn't catch you again." Cautiously, she held out her hand. That in itself was very risky. The coyote stretched out his neck and sniffed at her fingers. His cold, wet nose touched her fingertips. Then he gave them a quick, warm lick. She almost pulled her hand away, but stopped herself. No, he was not aggressive at all. In fact, he slid his butt closer as he sat down and thumped his tail against the ground. When she did not respond as he had hoped, he sat up on his haunches, crossing his forepaws when he was sitting fully erect. How could she refuse a signal like that? Sonia caught herself giggling at his antics. He reminded her slightly of the red monster coyote that had frequented Turn recently. She came closer and petted his head. This seemed to please him. His tongue flopped out of the side of his mouth. Despite his reaction and pleasure, it was unlikely human hands before had ever loved him. This feeling was amazing, and it was so for both of them. Sonia was touching and petting a wild animal. Of all things, it was a coyote. Bravely, she began to pet and scratch harder. She even pushed him onto his back to scratch his belly. He seemed to enjoy that too. "I need to find the road," she sighed, well aware that he could not understand. Still, she needed to voice her concerns, and he seemed perfectly happy to hear her voice. "I don't know how to get to Care. I don't know how to get back to Turn. I don't know how to get back to the wagons. I can't make a fire, or hunt, or build a shelter. I'm all alone out here. I'm scared." The coyote cocked his head to the side. He seemed to be listening. Dogs were amazing like that. He let out a whimper and nuzzled his head against her. That was how he knew to comfort other coyotes. Perhaps it would make her feel better too. She absently hugged him. This gave him the opportunity to lick her face. "What am I going to do?" The coyote lifted his nose to the air. His nose was far more powerful than a human's. Despite his fondness for her, he seemed to realize that humans just didn't belong here. He seemed to realize that she had a pack of her own. She had their scent. From here, he could smell the men, their fires, and their meals. But he wondered if taking her back was wise. Men had those big boomsticks. Men had rifles. Rifles and coyotes didn't get along. This decision was a hard one, and it made him whimper. Besides, it was getting dark. Soon, it would be very difficult for Sonia to see him, let alone follow him through the dark woods with no torches. There'd be no use to risk it now. It would do better to take her somewhere to let her eyes adjust to the darkness and be safe. He had to take her somewhere else, and he knew just the place.